All right, we're going to look at chapter 12 for investments. This is macroeconomic and industry analysis. So national economic environment is a crucial determinant of industry performance. So when they use words like the economy, and they're speaking of the local economy, or the United States economy in our case, because that's where we are, that's what they're talking about. And that is a major factor determining how successful a business is going to be and how they should react to the external environment. Exchange rates. Exchange rates are just the rate at which a domestic currency is exchanged for a foreign currency. So how many US dollars does it take to get a euro, or how many for a Great British pound, or how many for a Canadian dollar, or how many for a Japanese yen, or any of those types of currencies. So this is a chart that shows economic performance of local currencies versus US dollar currencies within other countries. So you can see, and obviously US is equal because we're not a different country, so local currency versus US dollar should be 1-to-1 there. And now this talks about, or shows between 2003 and 2016, the comparison of the US dollar to other currencies, the UK, which would be the British pound, the euro, which is the currency for most of the members of the European Union, Japan, obviously, as well, another big fiscal economy in the world. So this is the real exchange rates between these countries and the United States. All right, GDP, you should have heard this probably in economics class, but gross domestic product, the market value of all goods and services produced over a period of time. A key economic indicator, we would call it, something that we look at to see how the economy is doing. Unemployment rate is another key economic indicator, where we would, and this is the ratio of number of people who are unemployed to the total labor workforce. So how many people are working. There's also a separate number you can calculate based on how many people actually want to work, because you have some people, individuals who are choosing not to work for other purposes, say they're a stay-at-home parent, or especially at COVID right now, you might need to be teaching your own children. So you got to be careful with that rate, because it depends on whether you are counting it as people who are wanting to work or just people who are not working as a whole. Inflation. Inflation is the rate at which general levels of prices for goods and services are rising. So the fact that something doesn't cost the same this year as it does next year and the year after and the year after is inflation. So if you think about when you were a kid, and maybe if you can recall back, or 10 or 15 years ago, and what it costs to buy certain things versus what it costs today, generally things are more expensive. There are some exceptions, and we'll get into the product life cycle later. We think about technology and advancement, but if you talk about staples, talk about bread and milk and food and other commodities, the inflation rate is the difference between what those cost before and what they cost now. Okay, interest rates, another economic indicator, the domestic macroeconomy. High interest rates reduce the present value of future cash flows, whereas obviously low interest rates would do the opposite. A budget deficit, which our government has had for quite a while, is the government spending in excess of government revenue, so they're bringing in less in taxes than what they're spending, which is like any other business. Budget deficit is really similar to a net loss for net income, because my revenues exceed, or my spending exceeds my revenues, and I do not have a positive income. And then sentiment. Sentiment is just overall whether people are thinking things are going well or poorly. This has been a major driver in recent months because of COVID. So every time you hear, oh, things are coming back or doing better, people start getting optimistic. And then when numbers start skyrocketing again, oftentimes people get more pessimistic. So you'll hear these words thrown around a lot, especially in the pandemic time that we're dealing with right now. So this is the line for the S&P 500. And for 12, 18, and 25 times earnings, from close to zero in 1955 to 2000, 2000 to 1500 and 1000 respectively, 2015 before declining slightly in 2017, the S&P line is between 18 and 25 times the earnings over most of the period, but above 25 times earnings in 2000 and 2009. And all of it says all values are approximations, but you can see The S&P 500, you see when it peaks over this, we got over 25 times earnings per share. And here we're over 18 earnings per share. Here we're over 25, even though everything's dipping. Still, the S&P is performing better than 25 times earnings per share. All right, fundamental factors of interest rates. Supply of funds from savers. Okay, so people putting money in the banks and saving it so that those banks can lend that out to other people. The demand for funds from borrowers. So how much people want to take out loans for lending or have some additional debt. The government net supply and demand for funds modified by the Federal Reserve. We're going to talk about monetary policy and fiscal policy here in a minute. And the expected rate of inflation are all things that affect the interest rates. So this shows the two parallel lines with negative slopes, and that is demand. And it shows two different equilibrium points. We have E at the original, and then we have E1 where it shifts to when demand shifts. So the equilibrium for the real rate of interest, and when the funds increase, the demand, when the funds increase, the demand shifts to the right. But generally also that means the interest rate will go up. So that's the kind of the long and short of how interest rates work. The higher the interest rates, usually the less demand for funds. The lower the interest rates, generally the greater demands for funds, and that's where you're getting your negative slope for on that demand curve. So think about if you were here, okay, the higher interest rates, people wouldn't want nearly as many funds, okay? But at lower interest rates down here, this is my interest rate line here, then they're going to demand substantially more funds. All right, demand shock is an event that affects demands for goods in a service, goods and services in an economy. So this is some sort of event, and actually we're going through one today. It's election day as I'm recording this. So a lot of times that will create a demand shock. COVID-19 obviously has created a demand shock when you saw things like toilet paper and water and stuff you couldn't find on the shelves anymore. Those would be demand shocks. And then supply shocks, the event that influences production capacity and costs in the economy. So similar, but this on the supply side. Okay, policies and federal government policies and how they handle, control, and otherwise try and govern at least some of the economy through interest rates and through policy. So fiscal policy is the use of government spending and taxing for stabilizing the economy. So this is, you know, changing our tax code. And changing our demand for goods via the tax code. So, you know, making something a tax deduction, like, well, for example, for a while, when if you had more economic appliances in your house, so if you had a more green dishwasher or stove or heater or air conditioner, you could get credit for that, or if you put solar panels on your house. So those would be fiscal policies. Monetary policies are actions taken by the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve to influence the money supply and the interest rate. So monetary policies we're talking about, they really only have about 4 things that they can do to affect monetary policy. Those 4 things are changing the discount rate. And the discount rate is effectively what the banks can borrow money from the Federal Reserve. So what happens is if I can borrow money from the Federal Reserve for 1%, then I'm going to have to charge my lenders more than that, or the people that I'm lending to as a bank, more than that, so that I make money, because banks, you know, are businesses as well. But if the discount rate or the rate that the Fed is lending money is 5%, well, I'm going to have to, again, lend money for more than the 5%. So they control that monetary policy discount rate controls a lot of what the interest rates are for lending money out. Another one is reserve requirements. Reserve requirements means that a bank is legally obligated to keep or maintain a certain percentage of funds on hand. So let's say the bank's total deposits is $10 million, and let's say that 10% is the reserve requirement. They would have to keep $1 million. Why does that matter? Well, that matters because that means I can only lend out $9 million. So same scenario, if I've got assets of $10 million, but my reserve rate is 5%, well, now I can lend out $9.5 million rather than the original $9 million. So that changes up the amount of, that changes the money that's actually out in the economy to be used. And then, so we have the discount rate, we have the reserve requirement rate, we also have the federal funds rate, and we have the treasury bill, the T-bill rate, and they can buy or sell T-bills to also decrease or increase the policies. Supply side policies direct productive capacity of the economy. The goal is to induce workers and owners to produce goods. So this again is usually a tax policy, but it can also be subsidies. Okay, subsidies is another supply side policy. Business cycles. So the recurring cycles of recession and recovery. It happens all the time. On a regular basis, we go through economic spurts of growth and economic declines. So the peak is a transition from the end of an expansion to the start of a contraction. A trough is a position at which a point becomes a recession and recovery. So here's where we're in expansion. As we start to head down, it's a contraction. And then we have the trough, and this is the low point of generally a recession or something along those lines. And then we have the expansion, we're coming back up. And this is what the economy does all the time. Now you say that and say, well, why can't you just make all the money you want if you know the economy's doing this, and you can maybe find some stocks or some investments that follow this curve very well, so you can just always make sure and buy when it's down here and sell when it's up here, which would just make you all the money that you could ever know. Well, the reason is because while we have good economic indicators and information is becoming faster, the fact of the matter is that still, generally speaking, what I don't know, well, I do know there's peaks and troughs all the time. I don't know the height of this peak. I don't know the length of this, the width of this peak, or the height and breadth of it, I guess I would say. And the same thing with the trough. So I don't know how deep the trough is going to be. I don't know how low it's going to go, and I don't know how long it's going to last. So both of those things that when you add those into the thought process of this equation, you know that time is part of it, but also how extreme it is. So the only difference between a recession and a depression is the depth of the trough and the width of the trough. So, say this, let's just say, for example, this that is being shown on this graph is a recession. In fact, a recession. A depression could go something like, and I can't draw a line here if you watch my mouse, could go something like down and even further and lower and last much longer, and then come up over here, okay, for a much wider trough and deeper trough, and that would be the difference. This would be a recession, and a deeper and wider trough would be a depression. All right, cyclical industries. Industries with above average sensitivity to the state of the economy. So, industries that really, either have a direct or inverse relationship with the economy. So, for example, in a direct relationship with the economy, usually car dealers and home sales usually have a direct relationship with the economy. When people are feeling secure and good in their job, and they're making the money they expect to make, and they don't feel like they're going to be fired or let go anytime soon, they tend to spend money on new vehicles and money on new homes and things of that nature. Whereas when they don't, that's a direct relationship, by the way. When the economy is not doing so well, generally speaking, you'll see those industries not do so well, not do well during those times. Then there's also cyclical industries that have an inverse relationship with the economy. Examples of that would be car mechanics, kind of the opposite of that car dealer. Liquor stores, generally, alcohol sales generally have an inverse relationship. So car mechanics, the reason is because people aren't feeling safe, they aren't feeling secure. So instead of going to buy a new car when their car starts acting up on them, they get it fixed instead. So they have an inverse relationship with the economy. The economy is doing well, mechanics are used less. The economy is doing poorly, mechanics are used more. And liquor stores is kind of obvious, but people are just, generally when they're not happy or things aren't going well, they tend to drink more. And when things are going well, they tend to drink less. So generally speaking, alcohol sales has an inverse relationship with the economy as well. Defensive industries with below average sensitivity to the state of the economy. So these are industries that kind of just do well throughout. It doesn't mean they don't move, it doesn't mean they don't change, it doesn't mean the economy doesn't affect them. Generally, just what we're talking about is the fact that it doesn't affect them as much or as severely as it does these cyclical industries. So this is a chart showing indexes of leading coincidence indicators for the United States. So we're talking about indicators of what the economy is going to do. And we're talking about the height of the depths, or the height of the peaks and the depths of the troughs. And obviously you can see our recession time frames, and we have a recession here too, in the United States anyways. Economic series that tend to rise or fall in advance of the rest of the economy. Average weekly hours of production workers, initial claims for unemployment insurance, manufacturers' new orders, Institute of Supply Management Index and new orders for non-defense capital goods, new private housing units signed by local building permits, the yield curve spread between a 10-year T-bond and federal funds rate, the stock price. So these are all things that will show you or tell you what these are doing is just talking about the economic indicators that showed that these things were going to happen, that either we were going to start on our way up. In this case, they're showing what was going to happen when it started on our way down. But what they do is they study, okay, what were the indicators, what did the indicators show when this happened, and they can go look historically. And they see that these elements are things that will lead to, okay, let me say that. They've shown a correlation between changes in these variables and either a rise or fall in the economy. Economic series that tend to rise or fall in tandem with the rest of the economy. Employees and non-agricultural payrolls, personal income less transfer payments, industrial production and manufacturing and trade sales. Economic series that tend to rise and fall behind. So this is at the same time, this is before, and this is after. Average duration of unemployment, ratio of trade inventories to sales, change in index of labor cost per unit of output, average prime rate charged by banks, commercial and industry loans outstanding. So these all tend to happen after a rise or a fall. So these are indicators that when you see these, that means we're coming out of something, whether it's a rise or a fall, generally we're coming out of it. So here's some examples of different economic forecasts, basically. We're not going to look at that in too much detail. So this is the economic calendar at Yahoo. So they have the forecast, they have the expected, and they have these as part of these are their statistics. So these are their economic indicators to see what they think the economy is going to do. Okay, I'm going to stop this video there for now.